This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
In a phone conversation, the military commander of the Taliban, Mullah Dada, told an Al Jazeera correspondent in Islamabad that the Taliban is in control of the Afghani state of Kirkuk. Taliban fighters attacked Afghani forces, killing 5 of them and injuring others. Meanwhile, 4 other people, including a police officer, were killed in a suicide attack near the parliament in Kabul.
A suicide attacker who was driving a booby-trapped vehicle exploded himself when he was stopped by the Afghan police. The explosion killed and injured a number of Afghan nationals, including some police officers, in addition to destroying cars that were parked nearby. One can tell from these images that the explosion was severe. The police said that they were in the process of pursuing the attacker based on intelligence information.
5 people were martyred. We are still unable to identify the perpetrator or the car that was used in the attack.
The Taliban has clearly stepped up its attacks and confrontations with the Afghan and NATO forces. Neither side seems to be able to achieve a decisive victory. About 100 Taliban fighters took control of governmental buildings in Zabul state. A spokesman for the state's governor said that 5 police officers were killed and 4 others were injured when Taliban fighters attacked their convoy. The Taliban said that 2 of its forces were killed in the ongoing clashes with NATO forces in Singin in Helmand state. Waliullah Shaheen, Al Jazeera Television, Kabul.
Waliullah Shaheen, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
وفي غضون ذلك أقر رئيس الأفغاني حامد كارزاي بأنه أجرى اتصالات.
The Afghani president said that he made contact with the Taliban movement and reiterated that foreign fighters within the Taliban must be eliminated and expelled from Afghanistan.
طردهم من أفغانستان وتدميرهم.
We have a lot of other Taliban coming to talk.
We have a lot of other Taliban members coming to talk to us. Some of them came and talked to me. This has been going on for a long time. Afghani members in the Taliban are always welcomed because they are part of this country, like us. But the foreigners in Taliban are not welcome. They must be destroyed and expelled. They have been destroying our lives and killing our people. They are not welcome, and we will not talk to them. They are our enemies, and they will be expelled. The released British sailors recanted the statements they had made in Iran, saying that the Iranians had demanded that they confess to trespassing in Iran's regional waters. The sailors said that making this confession was a primary condition for their release, and that the Iranians had threatened them with 7 years imprisonment if they were to refuse. The sailors also said in a written statement that they were conducting a routine inspection operation before they were detained by Iran, and that they did not trespass into Iran's regional waters. They said that they were 2 miles away from Iran's regional waters and that the Iranian Navy had ulterior motives. They said that they were exposed to psychological pressure and that they were interrogated harshly. Previously, one of the 5 sailors had said in a televised interview that they were collecting intelligence information about Iran's activities in the region. During his Friday sermon, the prominent religious leader, Ayatollah Ahmed Janti, said that Iran is close to achieving a complete nuclear energy cycle. He also said that the world today opposes the U.S. and Israel.
God willing, the Iranian nation will develop a complete nuclear energy cycle. Iran has been advancing towards this goal with great strides. People around the world are paying attention to the Islamic awakening and oppose the U.S. and Israel. The U.S. and Israel are no longer as powerful as they used to be, and they are heading towards their demise. This may take some time, but it will eventually happen.
An Al Arabiya reporter said that the American and Iraqi forces have been launching a large military operation in Diwaniyah, the largest city of Al Qadisiyah government in southern Iraq, and that they were able to control the Jumairiyah and Al Askariya neighborhoods after violent clashes with the Al Mahdi army. During the clashes, 5 people were killed and 15 others were injured. Our Al Arabiya reporter said that an arrest campaign was launched in the city and that some members of the Al-Sadr movement were detained. According to the Iraqi forces, 20 people were killed and 30 others were wounded during a suicide attack in Al-Ramadi in western Iraq. The police announced that 31 people were arrested within the framework of enforcing the rule of law military operation in Abu Ghraib, Al-Mahmudiyah, and Baghdad. 8 security forces personnel were injured.
Six out of 15 released British sailors and Marines appeared before cameras for a news conference at Royal Marine Base Shivna after 26 hours being kept in quarantine for debriefing. They read out a text denying their confessions in Tehran. 3 British troops who seemed nervous consecutively read out a pre-written text and rejected their acknowledgement of illegally entering Iranian territorial waters. Asked about his remarks in Tehran on intruding into Iran's waters, Lieutenant Felix Carmen responded in a way that automatically confirmed his Tehran comments, saying, quote, "Captain Cresser and I were the ones explaining our positions on the map. We said under the documents which are present here, it seems we have entered Iran's territorial waters. We tried to ensure Iranians that our move was not on purpose," end of quote. And Britain said it has suspended all boarding operations in the Persian Gulf and is reviewing all procedures after the detention by Iran of 15 sailors and Marines who had illegally entered Iranian territorial waters. The 15 British Navy crew were released by Iran on Thursday and flown to London. An Italian state TV channel has broken the news that the U.S. has hidden hundreds of A-bombs in its military bases in European countries. The channel disputes the number of nuclear-capable missiles in the continent, saying Washington has over 480 atomic bombs in different European countries, including Italy, which is home to 50 nuke bombs, together with 40 atomic warheads in a military base in the north. An American defense expert told the state-run TV that according to the old NATO classified documents, the U.S. move to deploy B-61s on European soil runs counter to the NPT, which disapproves of the proliferation of such weaponry in any way.
Will chlorine gas, that was first used in World War I, become the most lethal weapon of the 21st century? This question directs us to the situation in Iraq, where more than 20 people were killed and 30 injured because of the explosion of a vehicle transporting chlorine. Those who were spared physical injuries suffered from problems in the respiratory system due to inhaling large amounts of toxic gas. We moved from the area of Ramadi to Al-Diwaniyah, where violent clashes erupted between the Iraqi and American security forces and the Mahdi militia army that have resulted so far in 1 killed and 19 injured. Also in Iraq, the European Liberty Radio, Radio Liberté, said that the body of the female reporter, Hama El-Khalaf, was found after her disappearance on April 3rd of this month.
هم يثقون قليلا أو حتى لا يثقون بالمعلومات التي يتلقونها من مسؤوليهم العسكريين أو وسائل الإعلام.
A US poll showed that the American people have little trust, or none at all, for the information received from their military officials or the press and media. The poll was conducted by Boy Research Center, which showed that 52% of Americans do not trust military accounts of the war in Iraq, while 60% of Americans do not trust the media and press. These numbers contradict the large amount of trust that Americans expressed at the beginning of the war in 2003,
where 85% of them trusted military information and 81% believed that the media was trustworthy.
يعتبرون أن وسائل الإعلام تنقل بأمان الأحداث.
The reporter from the news center of Tehran said that the anti-aircraft artillery located around the Bushehr nuclear plant in southern Iran launched its missiles at 4 a.m. this morning in shelling that lasted for 20 minutes. According to our reporter, the sounds of the anti-aircraft missiles caused panic amongst the inhabitants. The Iranian authorities did not make any clarification about whether the incident was a military maneuver or an accident. Next Monday, Iran will celebrate what is called the National Day of Nuclear Technology, in which the Iranian president will announce from Natanz nuclear facility what is described as the recent nuclear accomplishments.
While
the United States is deeply involved with the situation in Iraq, it seems indifferent to the crises of the British sailors who were recently released. The US Secretary of Defense said that the release of the sailors would not change US policy towards Iran.
I don't think there's any connection between his action to release the British sailors and what might or might not happen between the United States and Iran in the future in terms of talks or anything else for that matter. I will simply say, as I did before, the motives of those who took the sailors, who authorized the taking of the sailors, who moved the sailors to Tehran, and the decision to release them are unknown to us at this point.
In an interview with the Kalam An-Nas, People's Talk program on LBC, the former American ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, revealed that after UN Resolution 1701 was passed, the US, France, and other members of the UN Security Council had decided to draft another resolution that dealt with Hezbollah's military capabilities. He said, regrettably, 6 months have passed and no second resolution has been drafted, adding that this will have a decisive impact on the future of Lebanon.
Now, I know some in Lebanon have argued that the tribunal should have been purely international, but I don't think that that would make a fundamental difference in the conduct of the trial that we all hope will come soon. Merely setting up an international tribunal would not be sufficient to bring President Assad of Syria to justice if, in fact, he turns out to be one of the co-conspirators, one of the defendants in the case. So I understand why people would like to see the tribunal created, but I think my personal opinion is that that Lebanon itself is better off to try and keep it in the form that it was originally established.
With regards to the July war, Mr. Bolton, were you overseeing an American-Israeli understanding to carry out a military attack to dismantle Hezbollah after all other options, including the international dialogue, have been tried in Lebanon?
What we wanted to do was use the hostilities as a pivot point to come to a more sustained solution, at least with respect to Israel and Lebanon, to try and lay the foundation through the resolution of this conflict, lay the foundation of the possibility of a lasting peace between Lebanon and Israel. So that's why we believed that Israel, responding to the Hezbollah attack, was exercising its legitimate right of self-defense. And we did not want to see a premature ceasefire that would get us exactly back into the kind of cycle that we were trying to avoid. That was the grand strategy that was embodied in what we were trying to do in New York. I think there were certainly things we did not accomplish in Resolution 1701. And there are certainly things 1701 provided for that have not come to pass. We didn't deal with the question of disarming Hezbollah, which I think is at present the single greatest threat to democracy in Lebanon, nor has 1701 been carried out in its provisions to stop the flow of arms into Lebanon that are beyond the control of the government. So I completely agree there were some disappointments and inadequacies in the resolution, and it means there's considerable additional work to be done.
Mr. Bolton, are you preparing? Is Israel preparing? Or is Israel being encouraged to carry out a new military attack in the future to achieve these goals? Do you have information about an imminent Israeli operation to achieve these goals of dismantling Hezbollah and realizing the objectives of the UN Resolution 1701, which has not been implemented?
Well, I don't consider that Israel conducted an attack in the first place last summer. I think it was responding to not only the particular incident resulting in the attack against the Israeli Defense Forces, but to the ongoing threat that Hezbollah represented to Israel. What I would like to see happen is that the democratic institutions of Lebanon grow in strength, that the Syrian influence be completely removed, that Syria withdraw its intelligence assets as well as its military, that Syria live up to the obligations of Resolution 1559 and establish normal diplomatic relations with the government in Beirut, demarcate the boundary between the two countries. And I would also like to see Hezbollah make a decision whether it wants to be a legitimate political party or whether it wants to be an armed group of terrorists. You can't have a functioning democracy where most of the parties act like regular political parties in any democratic society around the world, and yet another major faction is a militia. That's a recipe for trouble into the future. So I think if Hezbollah really wants to see representative government in Lebanon, wants to see the government of Lebanon run Lebanon as opposed to Syria or Iran, it should begin the process of disarming.
The Syrian ambassador to Washington said that the isolation imposed on Syria had ended a while ago. He described U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's visit to Damascus as positive. Our correspondent in Damascus interviewed the Syrian official, first asking how much Syria has succeeded in ending the isolation, which was imposed by the White House on President Bashar al-Assad's regime.
This is a step forward, but our opinion in Damascus is that this isolation had ended a while ago. European countries, with almost no exceptions, have resumed meeting with us. The European Commissioner resumed dialogue with us, and there have been an exchange of visits between us. In the United States, for some 3 or 4 months, members from the American political arena and decision-making institutions, including congressional leadership and senior media figures in America, have requested to talk to us. There is almost a consensus on the need to resume diplomatic and political ties with Syria, except for one voice, the White House. Is this a good and progressive step? Yes. Is this a total end of the boycott? No, I don't think so. Attempts to isolate Syria have not succeeded. What we are seeing today and what we saw last week with visits by members of Congress confirm that there is a closing of the political gap in the American political system's policy towards Syria.
There were a series of demands made by Pelosi. She stated these demands directly, including combating terrorism, releasing the prisoner soldiers who are being held by Hezbollah and Hamas, in addition to securing the Iraqi-Syrian borders. How are these demands different from the demands being made by the American administration?
There is a big difference. The American administration thought it could solve any issue with Syria through orders. It comes in and says that Syria must do this and that and then leaves. This doesn't help. The U.S. tried to impose things on us using extortion, threats, by attempting to isolate and weaken the country, perhaps by making the Syrian regime fall. All of this was not successful. However, we never change our message. We would always say that we think that our region and the Middle East require a just and comprehensive resolution. We believe in a peace process and we believe in solving all the problems of the region. Attempting to impose on us does not work. Mrs. Pelosi and her accompanying delegation did not come and try to say, you have to do this and that. When she began her talks 3 or 4 times with the foreign minister, with the vice president, and with the president of the republic, and after that, in her press conference at the Syrian airport, she said, I carry a message of respect, hope, and friendship.
Do you expect that there will be a Syrian-American breakthrough soon? Especially since the foreign minister expressed hope that Pelosi will convey to the American administration a positive picture of Syria, one that it is cooperating and optimistic about all the stalled issues.
There are 2 perspectives on this. One of the perspectives says perhaps President Bush and the American administration do not exactly know Syria's real position because it does not speak with Syria. So this was a good opportunity. Pelosi is the leader of the majority party in Congress, and she is the Speaker of the House, who represents to a certain extent the majority of American public opinion. We told her, this is our position, and please tell the American administration. So she was tasked with learning about the Syrian position without any specific goals. However, there is another possibility. That is that the United States knows exactly what the Syrian position and it has a different opinion. The difference is that Syria is not isolated. As we see it, the American administration is isolated with its rigid ideological position that does not want to dialogue with Syria. Whereas the Congress, both the Democrats and the Republicans, want to dialogue with us. Think tanks and decision-making institutions in the United States also want to speak with us. The media, Western Europe, the entire world wants to dialogue with us.
The peace offer which Pelosi brought with her from Uhud Olmert, does Damascus see it as a serious offer because Olmert may want to escape his obligations by using Syria as a pretext, by saying that Israel offered Syria peace and it rejected this offer?
We never hasten. We have doubts about Ehud Olmert's credibility. But on the other hand, Nancy Pelosi is not someone who should be underestimated. As I said, she represents the majority of Congress in the most powerful country on earth. This is the first time we have heard this kind of talk. So when the Israeli Prime Minister says for the first time that he wants to resume the peace process, we must take it seriously, at least on the face of it, without underestimations. However, we cannot forget his other positions throughout the years, which were overtly escaping from achieving a peace process. An indication of this is his rejection of the Arab Peace Initiative, which has been reintroduced for the 4th time and was strongly supported and debated during the Riyadh summit.
On the issue of the Syrian promise to help in releasing the detained Israeli soldiers, how will Syria pursue this?
Simply, this was suggested to us on merely humanitarian basis. There are 3 Israeli prisoners. Can we help them? Of course, we are human. We all feel with them. But there are dozens of Arab prisoners in Israel. So if you approach the issue from a merely humanitarian point of view, then all human suffering is equal. There is nothing wrong if they want us to really work with the U.S. Congress and with those who want to release them to come to a humanitarian solution to the prisoner issue on both sides. We say there must be an honest deal, a return of the prisoners to their families. I think that all parties are open for this. If you want us to make good efforts on this, there is nothing wrong, but on the condition that all human suffering is equal. There is no such a thing to place greater value on some people's suffering over the suffering of others.
The
families of kidnapped soldiers Eldad Regev and Ehud Goldwasser followed with great attention the remarks of a Hezbollah leader who said that the two captives are receiving humane treatment. In an interview published today in the Nazareth-based Al-Sunara newspaper, Mohammed Al-Kumati, the leader of Hezbollah's political wing, said the two abducted soldiers are receiving similar treatment to that given to Elchanan Tannenbaum, the Israeli civilian who was returned to Israel alive after being held captive by Hezbollah for 4 years. Speaking to Army Radio today, Ehud Goldwasser's father, Shlomo, criticized the government for not doing enough to secure the release of the two reservists since their abduction last July. Goldwasser said Israel should learn from the recent example set by Britain during the Iranian prisoner crisis and hold direct talks with the kidnappers rather than going through mediators. He also expressed hope that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah will follow the conduct of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in acting to ensure the release of the two Israeli soldiers. At the same time, Goldwasser urged Hezbollah to provide concrete proof of the welfare of his son and fellow captive Eldad Regev. There is nothing more simple than sending us some sort of sign of life from the two soldiers, Goldwasser said, either by sending a tape, calling the Red Cross, or showing the two on television, as the Iranians did. IDF Corporal Gilad Shalit, being held by Hamas, recently had his eyeglasses returned to him after almost 10 months in captivity. That report also coming out of today's Al-Sunara newspaper. Palestinian sources quoted in the report say that Gilad's father, Noam Shalit, handed the eyeglasses to an Egyptian delegation mediating a prisoner exchange deal between Israel and the Palestinians. In the past, Shalit's captors reportedly refused the transfer, suspecting Israel might attempt to install a spying device within the lenses. But according to the paper, a decision to allow Shalit the glasses was made 2 weeks ago. Al-Sunara also reports that Hamas has handed the Egyptian delegation a list of some 1,000 Palestinian prisoners it once released in exchange for Gilad Shalit. Noam Shalit said in response that the most important thing at this point in time is to receive some sign of life from his son. Speaking from his headquarters in Ramallah today, PA Chairman Mahmoud Abbas acknowledged the significance of releasing Gilad Shalit, but stressed that the release must be part of a mutual exchange of prisoners.
We came to Gaza here to see through two important issues, the release of the Israeli soldier and the release of the British reporter. We say that Israel should release the Palestinian prisoners. We're not linking this with that, but we think that it is important that Shalit should be released, but at the same time that the Israelis should also release up to 9,500 Palestinian prisoners.
The Israeli settlers who moved into a 4-story building in Hebron in March will be evacuated in 2 weeks' time. That announcement was made last night by Defense Minister Amir Peretz. The settlers reportedly purchased the structure from its Palestinian owner last month, with dozens of families having moved in since that time. The building is located in a Palestinian neighborhood on the road linking the settlement of Kiryat Arba with the Tomb of the Patriarchs. Peretz said the settlers had failed to seek permission for their entry into the housing complex from the IDF civil administration, as is required by law. Hebron Jewish community spokesman David Wilder called Peretz's decision racist and anti-Semitic, while right-wing members of the Knesset have charged that political considerations lie behind the decision. The settlers intend to appeal the decision at the High Court of Justice. In the meantime, security officials estimate thousands of police and soldiers will be required to evacuate the building if a deal is not struck with the settlers to leave on a voluntary basis.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters, or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.